Good morning and welcome to the Cover Crop webinar this morning. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Marla Carlson and I'm the Executive Director of Sask Organics and will be moderating today's session. I'm speaking to you today from Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, situated on Treaty 4 lands with a presence in Treaty 6. These are the territories of the Nahiawak, the Anishinaabe, the Dakota, the Lakota, the Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Chief Nations. I'm just going to start this morning with some housekeeping, just so that we can make the event go as smoothly as possible. So the first thing we always ask is that if you have any programs running in the background, if you could close those down, it will help improve the quality of the video and your audio. Attendees are in listen-only mode, so only the moderators and panelists can speak. However, attendees can ask questions by popping them in to the chat function, which is on the control panel to your right. You see a red arrow pointing towards that. If you are joining us by phone, you have been prompted to enter an audio PIN number after joining the webinar. If you didn't enter your PIN, please ensure you're muted at all times. There will be time for questions and answers at the Q&A session at the end of the presentations. Also, to remind you, the webinar is being recorded, so all attendees will receive a link within a day of the live webinar. Our sponsors have provided handouts and they will also be emailed out to you along with the recording link. And then finally, please bear with us as sometimes we have technical glitches with the webinars, and we'll do our best to make sure everything runs as smoothly as possible. So first of all, thank you to our gold sponsors, Grain Millers and ProCert Organic Systems, and our silver sponsors, Manitoba Harvest and Roquette. And just a little bit about Sask Organics. For those of you who aren't familiar, we're the Industry Association for Certified Organic Farmers and Processors in Saskatchewan. By virtue of being certified organic, you are a member of our organization. There are 941 crop producers with 151 certified organic entities in the province, and we have just over 1 million acres under organic production. So moving swiftly on to introducing our guest speakers, we're very happy today to have with us Callum and Rob. Callum Morrison is a second-year PhD student at the University of Manitoba who is keen to discover how farmers in the prairies are adopting cover crops. One of the ways he is doing this is by conducting the Prairie Cover Crop Survey. The survey aims to provide more context for local farmers and policymakers by increasing information available on a local basis. And he will be followed up by Rob Wonder, who is an organic farmer and farms with his parents and brother just south of Foam Lake, Saskatchewan. They practice many regenerative management strategies on their 1,800-acre, 250-cow-calf operation. Cover cropping, intercropping, relay cropping, integrating livestock on as many acres as possible, utilizing ultra-high stocking density, making compost and compost teas and extracts are ways that they use regenerative agriculture to improve their farm. So I'm going to hand it off now to Callum. So over to you.
Hello everyone. So here is my talk on the Prairie Cover Crop Survey. Now before we get started, just I'd just like to ask a few questions via a poll so I can see who is listening, and then we can I can almost tailor the talk to you. So these will be sent via a poll. Okay.
Okay, I'm sharing the request or the results there, Callum. Can you see
Okay.
them?
Yeah, I'm very sorry about this. Where do I click to see the results?
Go to audience view in your control panel.
Audience view. Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Oh, okay, so where are you located? So unsurprisingly, most people are from Saskatchewan. Yeah, and we have a few people from Alberta and Manitoba. So yes, very highly concentrated in the prairies. And there's also someone calling in from, some people calling in from other parts of Canada. So yes, very specific to Canada. That's fantastic. So the next question I'm going to ask is how, what is your experience with cover cropping? How long have you been cover cropping? Have you never grown a cover crop before? Have you only grown it for 1 year, 2 years, a few years, or are you been cover cropping for a number of years? So let me know, and we'll see how knowledgeable you already are with cover crops. Okay. So I think we're ready to see the results of the poll. Okay, interesting. So we have quite a blend of experience. So there's a few people who've never grown it, but we have quite a significant number who've grown more than 6 times or 3 to 5 times, and that makes sense, as we'll see by the results we get going. So we have a huge range of people who've grown cover crops before and not. Okay, that's wonderful. Okay, wonderful. So we'll go back to my screen. Can we all see my screen now again?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll start my presentation. So it's just each time I click now, the audience view keeps coming up. I'm very sorry about this.
That's okay. Just maybe hide the audience view on your control panel.
There we go. So first, I'll give you an overview of today's talk. So first of all, I'm just going to tell you a bit about who I am and who my professor, Dr. Von Lawley, is, who are working on this cover crop survey. Then we'll just do a little bit of defining what we actually mean by a cover crop. We'll discuss why we actually need a cover crop survey. And we'll also have a brief summary of the 2019 survey. Then we'll have a look at organic growers as a specific group. And then we'll have a look into what agronomy organic farmers are actually using, how they're actually integrating cover crops into their operation. We'll have a look at what goals organic farmers have from cover crops, as well as looking at benefits they've seen and how long it took them to see those benefits. We'll then have a look at some problems farmers have had, and we'll have a look at what organic farmers want from the future, what they want to learn from research and extension. And then finally, we'll have a few questions, and I'll remind you how to take part in the cover crop survey. So first of all, what exactly is a cover crop? Now, we have to define this because there's a lot of terms thrown around, and there's a lot of different opinions as to what a cover crop is and what isn't. So what we've been using in this survey is perhaps the simplest definition and one of the most broadest definitions. So we've just said a cover crop is a non-cash crop grown primarily to cover the soil. And cover crops, as I'm sure you're aware, can have numerous different benefits depending on the type of crop, namely erosion control, boosting soil health, controlling weeds, fixing nitrogen, and many, many more, including pest control, nitrogen scavenging, etc. So who am I and why am I here? Well, basically, I grew up in Scotland. Both my parents were involved in agriculture. My father produced mini tubers for the seed potato industry and fruit plants, and my mother worked at the Scottish Crop Research Institute in pest control. So I grew up in an agricultural family. A few years ago, I moved to Altona in Manitoba, and I started my PhD at the University of Manitoba. Now, my thesis is looking at cover crops across the prairies, and I have two major parts of my research. My first one is looking at cover crop field trials. Essentially, I have 5 sites in across the 3 prairie provinces, and I'm comparing a rotation with cover crops to a rotation without cover crops, and I'm seeing how cover crops affect crop yield as well as quality, and how they're affecting soil physical and chemical properties. But also a major part of my research is conducting the Prairie Cover Crop Survey to see how farmers are actually adopting cover crops on the ground. So Dr. Von Lawley is my professor, and her main area of research is cropping systems research with a focus on cover crops. She's very interested in how plants and soils interact, and she wants to see how management can be used to address agricultural and environmental challenges. She's a specialist in soybean and corn agronomy, but she's very interested in how cover crops can be implemented on a variety of different cropping systems on the prairies. So first, I just want to classify define what the 2 major types of cover crops we're discussing today. So the first one is a full season cover crop, and it basically describes what it is. So it's a cover crop grown over the entire cropping season to provide cover over the entirety of the season. So the reasons why one of these might be grown would be to improve problem soils, or in, say, a saline area to reduce salinity, or say you've had a cash crop failure, maybe it's been hailed out or it was too wet to plant the cash crop. You may grow a full season cover crop, but also to build nitrogen, or maybe in between rows of fruit crops. Now, full season cover crops are very popular with organic growers. There's also shoulder season cover crops, and these are planted to provide cover after cash crop harvest. Now, even though they're designed to provide cover in the shoulder season, they may actually be planted before the harvest. So they may be planted at any time during the growing season. For example, they might be broadcast into a cereal crop a few weeks before harvest, and then grow until they're either killed by winter kill, or they could be terminated in the spring by a variety of methods such as tillage. So why on earth do we actually need this survey? So even though I'm sure you're all aware cover crops have been becoming increasingly popular on the prairies, they're still really a niche endeavor. Because they're becoming increasingly popular though, farmers are looking for information on how to integrate them onto their farm. But there isn't yet the wealth of information that comes from a community growing cover crops for so long. So farmers are looking at information coming from the United States. And the United States, even though they're producing great information on how to grow cover crops, it's not local to our environmental conditions in the prairies. And that's that's making it difficult for farmers who are wanting to integrate cover crops on their farms. So this survey is here to fill gaps, to provide context for farmers who want to integrate cover crops on their farm. And it will also be useful for people involved in the industry and policymakers to see what farmers are doing and what research is needed in the future, and say if they want to incentivize cover crops in the future, like is happening in the States, farmers can see what could best, these policymakers can see what best suits their needs. So last year we began the Prairie Cover Crop Survey, and it ran from October to April, and we saw 211 respondents who grew around about 84,000 acres of cover crops. Now, we were very happy with that result. My professor had no idea how many people would actually respond. We would have been happy with just 50 respondents. It started out as a minor part of my thesis, but due to the COVID pandemic, this was a great way where I could do research through whilst social distancing. And farmers really engaged with it. Some of the primary things that we found interesting was that cover crops were grown in rotation with dozens and dozens of different types of cash crops, right the way down to niche crops, as well as the major commodity crops. But also they're grown right across the prairies, as you'll see in the next slide. So as you can see, cover crops are grown right the way up into the Peace River Valley in Alberta, but they're also grown right the way down to the Red River Valley in Manitoba. So what I want you to take away with this is just cover crops are being grown in some form everywhere, no matter the climatic conditions in terms of the shortness of the growing season. They're grown in areas which are often known for their dryness in the fall, but also with the amount with areas which quite often have more moisture. Now, they're not being used the same everywhere, and farmers obviously are adapting to the local conditions. But this helps to dispel a myth that cover crops can only be grown in certain areas. But of course, it's more difficult in some areas and more prominent in some other areas. So the 2020 survey had a variety of changes. The first one is that we're also looking at people who've never grown a cover crop before. And we hope this will give us a lot more information. For example, we're going to be asking non-cover croppers what fears they have, reservations they have about growing a cover crop. And then we'll be able to compare that to, for example, problems farmers have actually seen grown a cover crop. Just so we can see if fears match up with problems. And this will be important if in the future governments do want to incentivize a cover crop. How could they engage with people who are just thinking about growing a cover crop? And we also include more options and questions that the 2019 respondents told us we wanted to see. This survey is very much a farmer-led survey. We're trying to answer questions that you, the farmers, want to know. And we also created a website, which I encourage you all to have a look at. It tells you a bit more about our goals, who we are, and why we want to survey. And when we create all our reports, they'll all be posted here, and it will be free for you to have a look at all of our results. So let's have a look at survey results from 2020 so far. That are related to organic growers. So far, we've had 42 respondents who are organic who grew cover crops. And we've had approximately 24,000 acres of cover crops grown by these organic farmers in 2020. If we look where most of the farmers are from, unsurprisingly, almost 2/3 are from Saskatchewan, and that likely just reflects the prominence of Saskatchewan for organic farmers in the prairies. And something else before we get into the agronomy, we need to also understand that even though these farmers identified as organic, they're not necessarily organic on all of the acres. So even though approximately 70% of our organic respondents were organic on all acres. There's still a significant number of our organic farmers who are only organic on some of those acres. So please note that that might explain some of our results, as you'll see later in the agronomy. So the other thing we need to understand before we look at the agronomy is that organic growers are a very diverse group. Even though the majority of farmers are identified as annual grain croppers, we also have a significant proportion who identify as regenerative, are livestock, and are intercropper. One thing we should note is organic farmers in our survey were far less likely to be livestock, identify as livestock farmers, and they were far more likely to identify as an intercropper. And that isn't too surprising. And let's have a look at what organic farmers have on their farms. So most organic farmers that we had responding, the most prominent crops they have on their farm are annual grain crops such as oats, spring wheat, and barley. But flax, pea, fall rye, and kind of forages are still relatively common on these farms. So the other thing I just wanted to show is looking at livestock. And as I said, organic farmers are far more likely not to have livestock than our non-organic group. But we still have a number of farmers who do have livestock who took part. And our tillage regime, it's important to understand that with organic group. With this group, most farmers are either conventional till or reduced till. Of course, hardly any farmers are no-till in the organic group, and a lot of that group are people who identified no-till were farmers who had some weren't organic on all their acres, whereas of course our no-till, our non-organic group is far more likely to have no-till on their farm. And this question here we've asked is, we asked farmers about farm ownership. And the reason why we were keen to ask this question is, one of my hypotheses is that farmers who own their land are more likely to invest the time and the effort in trying to improve their soil and invest in cover crops. And so far we've seen that organic farmers are far more likely to own all their land or most of their land than farmers who are non-organic. And that makes a lot of sense because you guys have to invest more time and effort in certifying your farm. So it makes sense that organic farmers would be more likely to own all their land or most of your land than non-organic farmers. So finally, we're now getting into the agronomy of cover crops for organic farmers. So a large proportion of respondents grew a full season cover crop. So about 75% of farmers who are organic grew a full season cover crop, but still the majority of farmers also grew a shoulder season cover crop, as you can see down here. So one thing to note is a large number of farmers grew both a full and a shoulder season cover crop. So even though more farmers grew a full season cover crop, the majority of acres were actually shoulder season cover crops. So shoulder season cover crops account for a greater acre because they're generally growing each shoulder season cover crop on over a larger area. So we've already discussed what organic farmers had on their farm, but
which of these cash crops are they actually growing before the cover crop? So seeing what cash crop is in a rotation with the cover crop. So for organic farmers, oats is number one cash crop that's grown before the cover crop, followed by spring wheat, barley, and fall rye. So all of the first four are cereals. And one thing we should note here is that oats is far more prominent with organic growers than non-organic growers. For non-organic growers, only 12% of respondents were growing cover crops after oats. And also canola was far more prominent with the non-organic group. So that's not surprising at all. So what percentage of the farmers under cover crops? So most of our farmers in the organic group are devoting between 10 and 40% of their farm area to growing cover crops in 2020. This is a higher proportion of the farm under cover cropping for organic growers than non-organic growers. Around about 50% of our respondents for the non-organic group were devoting basically 0 to 0.9% of their farm to cover crops in 2020. So organic farmers are devoting a much greater percentage of their farm to cover crops, but some farmers are devoting a far greater percentage of their farm to cover crops, right the way up to 90 to 100% on their farm. Something else which is very interesting is we've found organic farmers have been growing cover crops longer than non-organic farmers. That makes a lot of sense because, of course, organic farmers potentially have more to gain from cover crops due to, say, weed control and nitrogen, etc. Than non-cover croppers, than non-organic growers. You can see quite a significant percentage, 17% have been growing cover crops for more than 10 years. But the larger proportion for both groups, non-organic and organic growers, have been growing cover crops between 3 and 5 years. But still, a large proportion just started growing cover crops this year at 10%. So this is a question I get quite often, is about the number of species in cover crop mixes. So, perhaps surprising to you, non-organic farmers actually have more species in their cover crop mix on average than organic farmers. And I would hypothesize that that's because non-organic farmers are far more likely to graze their cover crop than organic farmers. Most farmers who are organic only have one species in their cover crop, or have 2 to 3 species in their cover crop. However, there are farmers who are growing right the way up to more than a dozen species in their cover crop mix. So there's a big diversity. Of course, most farmers who are organic are down the lower end of that scale, but it's incredibly diverse. So let's have a look at the most common cover crop species that farmers have in their mix. And for organic, clover is king. Now, that's understandable. Clover is a great crop for fixing nitrogen. And it's very interesting that clover is number one for organic by far. Then when you compare that to non-organic, clover is far, far less popular. Over 70% of organic farmers grew clover. Only 45% of non-organic farmers grew clover. A lot of other species, which are legumes, such as sweet clover and alfalfa, they're far more popular with organic farmers than with non-organic farmers. And also some cover crops which are very popular to be grazed are more popular with non-organic farmers than they are with organic farmers. Something else we should note is many of these species are very easily accessible for farmers on the prairies, that they're either crops which a lot of farmers grow, or so they are easily accessible. Quite often they're not very specialist species. So it'd be interesting to see how the species change with as cover crops become more popular on the prairies and seed becomes more accessible for these more specialist species. So how were cover crops planted? Now, interestingly, between the organic and non-organic groups, there was hardly any differences between these two groups on how cover crops were planted. Most organic acres were planted with an air seeder, drill, or a planter, but a large number are also broadcast. Some were incorporated with tillage, and only a very few percentage of organic respondents hand-seeded, which makes a lot of sense. That's more just fruit and vegetable growers, and most fruit and vegetable growers that we spoke to were non-organic. And in the non-organic group, there was one farmer who sowed their cover crops by airplane, which was very interesting for me, but hardly a significant group on the prairies, it seems. So how are farmers who are organic terminating their cover crops? Now, this understandably was very, very different between organic and non-organic farmers. Understandably, almost 75% of all farmers terminated their cover crops with tillage. And winter killing is also very is also quite prominent. Non-organic farmers were far more likely to terminate their cover crop with grazing than organic farmers. And if you look right the way down to the last, the least down the far right, you'll see there are a few farmers who identified as organic who are terminating their cover crop to herbicide. And I believe that's just because, as I said earlier, there are some farmers who are certified organic on some areas, but not in others. So there is still a small number of people who identify as organic who are using herbicide, but it's a tiny amount, whereas farmers who are non-organic, herbicide is one of the major reasons of terminating cover crops. But as you can see, there's a number of ways farmers in the prairies are terminating their cover crops. So what about cover crops being sowed as an intercrop? Now, on the prairies, it can often be, well, it's such a short growing season, there can be problems with, say, moisture at the end of the season. So farmers are having to get inventive with how they're going to establish their cover crop. So if we look here for organic growers, most farmers are seeding cover crop at cash crop planting, and a significant number are also broadcasting the cover crop into the cash crop before the cash crop is harvested. So say maybe a few weeks before harvest of, say, a cereal crop. But significant proportion here planted instead of a cash crop. That's, for example, a full season cover crop when you're not having any cash crop growing in the field that year. And a small proportion are seeding after cash crop harvest as a full season cover crop, not established as an intercrop. So here's an interesting thing. I get a few farmers asking me, so where are farmers getting their seed? And that's an important thing to think of, because that will affect how much you're going to pay for your cover crop and what cover crop species you have access to. So slight majority, almost between 50–55% of organic farmers are going to a cover crop seed specialist, but also a large proportion are growing their own seed or getting it from another farmer. Also a significant portion are just going to their typical agricultural seed merchant or input retailer And if you are getting it from a commodity crop dealer, such as a grain elevator or you know, those sort of seeds. So farmers are sourcing cover crops from a wide range, which will undoubtedly be different prices and different seeds available. So again, I ask, how much should I be spending on my cover crop seed? And farmers are paying vastly different prices for the cover crop seed mix. Some farmers aren't paying anything. However, this is what we were asking for, what they were paying if they were buying seed. So of course, if it says 0, you're definitely not paying nothing per acre, because everything has a cost. That if you're growing your own seed, you still have a cost, but this is if just farmers went out and bought seed. So that's all this is per acre. So the biggest proportion of farmers who are organic are paying between $0 per acre to $30 per acre. But there is still some farmers in the organic group that are paying right the way up to $70 plus an acre. So why are organic farmers growing cover crops? Now, the predominant reason farmers gave, the most common reason, was to build soil health and increase soil organic matter. And that makes a lot of sense. And for both groups, organic and non-organic, these were the most common answers given. But unsurprisingly, add soil nitrogen is the third most common reason for organic farmers. But also for organic farmers, it's unsurprising, weed suppression is also one of the most common reasons farmers are giving, and also erosion control, because organic farmers are far less likely to be no-till, and tillage is often way farmers are controlling weeds in organic farmers. But and scavenging nitrogen is also in the top 10 most common reasons farmers grew a cover crop. But we had dozens of reasons why farmers were growing cover crops. So anyway, that was just the goals. And I think what is equally, if not more important, is what are farmers actually seeing themselves since growing cover crops? And something I think you should take away is that only a small percentage, less than 20% of farmers, have not seen a benefit yet. And most of those farmers have only been growing cover crops 1 or 2 years. So over 80% of our respondents actually said they've seen benefits. The most common thing seen, which over 2/3 of our respondents have seen, quite broad, this is improved soil health, but also farmers have been seeing increased biodiversity and increased soil organic matter. Very important for organic growers. They've seen less weeds. Over half of farmers have seen less weeds. They've seen less erosion as well, just under half. And also need less nitrogen fertilizer, about 1/3. So farmers are fixing, number of farmers are fixing nitrogen, but also less weeds. Very important for organic farmers. So here's something as well, which even surprised myself. Well, maybe not even. It surprised myself quite a lot, because a lot of people have been telling me for quite a while now that it's going to take you a very long time to see benefits from cover crops, especially on the prairies, where we might not get a huge amount of biomass from growing cover crops over a season. But still, for 35% of farmers, they saw benefits within the first year of growing cover crops. Then you see it decreases after that to, only a very small percent of farmers have not yet seen benefits of cover crops. And again, most of those are farmers who have only been growing cover crops for 1 year. So farmers are seeing some form of benefit quite quickly from growing cover crops. And also what's interesting is organic farmers are seeing these benefits quicker than non-organic farmers, which again makes sense because organic farmers tend to be using tillage more, so have more, it seems they are wanting more erosion control, but also growing it for weed control and nitrogen. So profitability, this is another big question that organic farmers have been asking. And what's important from this is if we look, how have they cover crops influenced farm net profit? Well, the majority of farmers have either seen no change or, at the left-hand side of this graph, either a moderate increase or slight increase. So most farmers are either seeing no change or an increase. And a lot of farmers either don't know how cover crops have affected their net profit, it changes each year, or they don't feel they've been growing cover crops long enough to know how cover crops have affected their profit. Only a very small proportion, less than 5% for each of these two groups, have seen a decrease in their profit, whether that be a slight decrease or a moderate decrease. So for the most part, cover crops either aren't having a significant effect, are increasing farm profitability, or farmers do not know. So they seem to be benefiting organic farmers who've been growing cover crops profitability in a positive manner. So tillage. Now this I found a very interesting question to ask farmers who are organic, because of course tillage is such an important part of organic farmers' weed control program. So I didn't expect organic farmers to decrease their tillage so much after growing by growing cover crops. So as you can see, most farmers who are organic, who've started growing cover crops, have either not changed the amount of tillage they're using, or they've decreased it. However, there is still quite a significant proportion who increased their tillage. But for the most part, cover crops seem to be decreasing the amount of tillage organic farmers are using on their farm. So this is an interesting question we asked. How has farmers' cover crop acres changed over time? We asked farmers since growing cover crops, if they've started, have they increased year on year the number of acres they're growing? So I think this is a good indication of if farmers believe cover crops are worthwhile. Because if you grow cover crops for a few years and you think, I'm not seeing the returns I want, you're not going to be wasting money and resources unless you think it's a good thing to integrate onto your farm. So what is interesting in this is, if you look, since growing cover crops, only a few people have slightly decreased their acres, and no one told us, out of all these 42 farmers, not one significantly, that should say significant decrease, not increase down there, but not one significantly decreased their acres. So the highest percentage significantly increased their acres, followed by a slight increase or no change. So that is quite a good indication that farmers believe that cover crops are working, and so they are increasing their cover crop acres over time. And interestingly, if we look at the number of species in the cover crop, how has that changed over time? Most farmers either are not changing the number of species in their mix, or they're increasing them. So either significant increase or slight increase. Only a very small percent of farmers decrease their cover crops over time. So it appears over time, farmers believe that they might start with just a few species, and they decide that they want to grow more and more species, So it appears farmers think that it is beneficial growing more species over time. So now, what problems have organic farmers actually experienced? So the first thing I want to say is the majority of farmers who are organic have experienced some kind of problem growing a cover crop. I should say that we just asked farmers what problems they've seen. So this is anything on a scale from a minor inconvenience right the way up to a large problem. So bear that in mind. Farmers have seen many benefits, but they've also seen problems. And most of these problems tend to revolve around climate. So late harvest, preventing planting, short growing season, not enough moisture. Not enough moisture, particularly prominent in Saskatchewan, southern Alberta. And also things to do with costs, seed availability, increased labor. And of course, with organic farmers, you have problems with cover crop volunteers and problems with termination that aren't really as much of a problem with farmers who are non-organic. And finally, we asked farmers what would encourage cover crop use on their farm, and quite often it's all about the money. In a lot of other jurisdictions in the world, farmers are getting cash incentives to grow cover crops. So a lot of farmers said they would be receptive to payments for storing carbon, as well as tax credits for planting cover crops. We asked farmers if they're more likely to grow cover crops if their farm net profit increased. Not one organic farmer told us that they would be more likely to plant cover crops if their farm net profit decreased. So we asked that question in case farmers would be more likely to innovate if they had a less farm net profit. But but also some farmers would be wanting more information on how to grow cover crops and also technical assistance, farm tours, etc. So also we asked farmers where they get information about cover crops, and unsurprisingly, organic farmers are very likely to get information from other farmers about cover crops and experience. And that makes sense, particularly because there's not very much scientific research specific to the prairies on cover cropping, and maybe this will change as we do more research. But a lot of organic farmers go into podcasts, organic online videos, ag media, social media, and Twitter. One thing which is very interesting about social media on organic farmers is we found that organic farmers are far more likely to get their information from Facebook, and non-organic farmers are far more likely to get their information from Twitter. So it's very interesting how the two groups are getting the information is different. And here's some interesting things, because we also asked farmers at the end of the survey what questions they would like to see addressed through research and extension. And the most common things that organic farmers told us is they want to know which cover crop species are the best to grow for their region or soil. They also want to know what is the optimum number of species they should have in their mix, the benefits of growing a mix over maybe one species and vice versa. They want to know the best cover crop agronomy practices, as much local information as they can have, and they also want to see some quantification of economic and environmental benefits of growing cover crops. And thank you so much for listening to my talk. I know it's went on for a little bit and there was a little hiccup at the beginning. So I'd like to thank our funders, as you can see on the right of my screen here. And I'd like to draw attention to the survey. As I say, we're very happy to hear from all types of farmers out there, whether you've grown a cover crop or not. We really want to be able to compare these groups. So yeah, you can follow myself on Twitter and or my professor, Yvonne Lawley, and the link is pinned on those tweets. You can also follow us on Facebook on the Prairie Cover Crop Survey, or you can go to this this link here. And I'd be very happy to answer your questions about the survey. And I look forward to chatting with you. Thank you very much.
It's awesome. Thank you so much, Callum. That was really interesting, and I think provides a really great context, right? For I guess individual farmers know what they're doing on their farm, but to be able to put their experience within a larger context, I think can sometimes be really helpful. So I thank you for that, and encourage everybody to, if you haven't already, to go and fill that survey out. I do have a couple of questions, so we'll take those and then we'll move on to our next presentation. But the first question is, are spring planted green manure plowdowns considered a cover crop by your definition?
Yes, they would be full season cover crops. Yeah.
Okay,
So
no, perfect. No, that's great.
Yeah.
How do you, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, it's fine. If you next question.
Okay, no, for sure. I'll just go on to the second question here. How do biofertilizers factor in? Are farmers feeding the soil biology while implementing the cover crops, or adding things like compost tea to increase soil biology while cover cropping? Was that?
The thing is, I never asked a question about bio-tea, and I mean, this is the kind of thing that at the moment this research is very broad with the survey. Next year we're going to be moving to interviews, when I'm hoping to get a smaller number of farmers who've been cover cropping the longest, and interview them to see exactly, go far more deeper to try and answer some of those even more complex questions, that sit down with a farmer for more than an hour and really tease out all these different ways they're using cover crops. But at the moment, really, I'm really not sure, sadly.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Thank you for that, and thank you again for taking the time to be with us this morning and present your survey results. And now we're going to hand over to Rob Wonder, an organic producer who farms south of Foam Lake, Saskatchewan. So over to you. Great, we can see you, Rob. We can't hear you, in case you're talking.
There we go. Now you can hear me?
Now we can hear you. Yes, we can't see your screen, but I'm thinking that's next.
Oh. Can you see my screen now?
There we can now. Absolutely.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Oh, all right. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Rob Wonder, and we're going to go under the covers today. So we'll get started. Just a quick overview of our operation. We run about 250 cow-calf pairs on about 3,500 acres total. 1,800 acres of that roughly is cropland, and then the rest is in perennial pastures. And we're very focused on managing the system as a whole. So We grow a wide variety of cash crops, intercrops, cover crops. We do relay cropping as well. Majority of our acres are now organic, and the majority of the farm is in some sort of a rotation with annual and perennial crops. And the soil health principles are integrated as much as possible on every acre. So the pieces that make up our system is to keep the soil covered, obviously, living roots as long as possible, diversity, minimum soil disturbance, integrating livestock with plant density and intensity all year long, and I'll get into that a bit as well. We also make compost, and from that we make our own teas and extracts and seed treatments. We try hard to be adaptive managers because not everything works out according to plan, and so when something doesn't work out according to plan, we have to go into plan B or C. So all of this can look fairly complicated, or can get kind of busy and complicated. So we really rely on the KISS factor there. We like to try and keep it simple, stupid. Basically, we can achieve a lot of our goals by having a living vegetative plant in a system at all times in the soil. So why would we do that? Why we do that is it feeds and it protects the soil ecosystem. It cycles nutrients, not only nitrogen, but carbon and all the nutrients that were required to grow a healthy, profitable crop. It fosters and promotes life, and it makes farming fun and interesting. So something I always try to keep in the forefront of my mind is focus on what you want and not what you don't want. And I know that's always easier said than done. But clearly, I'm no expert, and I'm not here to say that I have it all figured out or anything like that. I'm not here to offend you or to say my way is right and you're wrong or anything like that. I just hopefully it can make you go and just take away an idea or two. So what is a cover crop? And a cover crop is planted in a time of fallow to capture nutrients. A cover crop can be utilized as livestock feed, as dry or silage, bales or pile, or as grazing. A cover crop can and should be designed to offer you weed control, and it can be simple or complex. Cover crops, to me, number one job is to feed biology. They can and they should do this all growing season, all year long. So what are we looking for in a season-long cover crop blend? We're looking for diversity as much as we can muster. In that, we'll have vegetative plants that will remain vegetative all year long. Something with regrowth potential. So after we go in and either cut it for feed, we want some species in there that are going to regrow so we can come back later and graze it. Just increases land utilization, or if we cut it, same thing to get that regrowth. So this is just an example here of a cover crop that we grew last year. It was a clean out the shed mix, so there was just a little bit of everything in it. There was probably 12 to 15 different things. So we initially seeded that for forage for grazing, but we ended up not needing it. So we were able to, we cut it for feed, and there's always lots of talk about you shouldn't remove any nutrients and so on. And I agree, we should try hard not to. However, there's some work coming out of Germany now that Dr. Christine Jones talks about just the roots alone is what, not just alone, but does the majority of the work when increasing soil organic matter and soil health. So we ended up cutting this field for feed. We took 2.5 dry bales an acre off of it, and then we ended up taking 2.5 silage bales on part of it as well. So it was it worked out to close to 5 bales an acre. It was very, very good that way. And then this is what it looked like about 40 days after the cutting. if we get rain, these things can really shine and produce a lot. And if we don't get rain, obviously it's not as good. But we ended up letting this terminate with the frost, and we brought our cattle in there in November, and we took another 40 cow days per acre off of that with just grazing. So it worked out really well. This is a non-organic field, obviously, and right here you could see this is a slough that I couldn't seed through that year, so I went out there and I threw out a pail of sunflowers, hairy vetch, and whatever else I had laying in the shed, and you could see it from the road. So it improved those areas dramatically. So what are we looking for in a cover crop growing in a cash crop together? Some may call this relay cropping or companion cropping. Shade tolerant species, species that won't set seed in the growing season, species that are not super competitive, and if they fix in, to me that's just a bonus. So why would we relay crop? And it's, it keeps that living root in the soil, cycling carbon primarily, and feeds the soil life, because as soon as that plant switches from vegetative growth to reproduction, the root exudates change, and so it doesn't actually feed the soil, starts removing from it. So that's the number one reason. It oops, sorry. It enhances our fall grazing or our winter feeding. It allows us to grow a cash crop and enhance the ecosystem at the same time. It fills a forage gap, production gap for us. And those of people listening in today, if you have livestock in your operation, it's really beneficial to sit down with the calendar even and just kind of plot out where you need to be, where these cover crops can fit in and take away on your feeding bill. Maybe not just the full season may not be required. So it kind of makes us more profitable by allowing us to have a better feed source for our cattle to come into. So, profitability by stacking enterprises, and this is the same field as the previous slide. So what you're looking at here is a cash crop of oats. Companion crops in there was hairy vetch, purple top turnips, and Italian ryegrass. So what are we going to do with this? When we plant something like this, we've got lots of different options. If we get into the growing season and we need forage for our livestock, we can graze it. We could cut it for feed. In both scenarios, there should be some regrowth if we get any amount of rain. Option A and most profitable is to combine it. And so that's what we ended up doing, and this is the aftermath. And so this was from last year, and the bigger photo there shows what the chaff piles looked like after the combine had went through it, and then you can see the stubble there. We still had a green living root green plant in December. It wouldn't be doing much, but at least it's green, and if the sun was to get to it, it would do a little bit of photosynthesizing. And there I am from the feeding cows, my favorite way, from the heated seat of my pickup, watching them chew on some chaff piles. And this is just another example of that, where we had dropped the same mix and just dropped the straw out of the combine. And this is kind of what it looks like when they're finished. And so, we're extending our grazing season, and that's really making the cover crop side really pay. we had 60 days of residue grazing in 2019. So with 150 cows at a custom rate of $250 per day, that worked back to $375 a day in feed savings. So you take that total and you multiply that by 60, and it comes up with $22,500 in feed savings. Now, Betsy didn't come and write a check to us, like Betsy the cow. So, I mean, obviously that didn't exchange, the money didn't exchange hands, but we did save, in those 60 days, we would have saved 300 hay bales. And that's just goes into the resiliency of the operation. And, you know, come 2020, if the yield, like hay yields were a little lower, we have extra carryover because of that. And it all works back in one way or another. So seeding green, some people would say why, and I would say why not. I mean, if it's possible, I never want to waste sunlight. And so that little root in my hand is a sweet clover plant that's just a couple weeks old. And if you look right here, you can see it's starting to nodulate already. So it's doing something from very young age. So this picture here was a clover crop that didn't come through in 2019 because of the dry spring that we had. So we turned the cattle out and we grazed it. And then we ended up just seeding right in behind the cows. We didn't do anything else with it. This field is in transition. This was the second year, and this was the oat crop that we had coming up after that. And there was oats and Italian ryegrass and some kale and turnips and just kind of whatever had kicking around. This was a plan B. So then we cut that for green feed, and it worked back to about 3 bales per acre. And then come back in October. On October 16th, we come back to do to graze the residue, and we got about 25 grazing days per acre from that. So what we're looking at here on this field, this picture, is actually worm castings on top of the soil. I guess I should back up a little bit. I did apply compost tea onto that oats. I'm not sure why or what did it, but anyways, I went over to do the perimeter check of the fence before we brought in the cattle and set up some fencing, and this is what I found. And so it just took me a long time to get around that fence after I seen that I was digging holes. So this is kind of what the soil looked like, or this is what the soil looked like in that scenario. And so we use livestock as a tool, and the art of high stock density grazing. I say it's an art. I think it is an art. We're adaptive grazing with adaptive management. So in this picture here, the split is start before and after, and the cattle are cleaning up a road lounge that the RM doesn't want to mow, and I'm too lazy to go in and cut all those trees out by hand so that the fence remains a good fence. So we just intensively graze along that down the road lounge. We bring in high stock densities on our full season cover crop acres, and this one here we're at about 1.5 million pounds of live weight per acre. So when we get into that, we're moving multiple times a day, and we were in this cover crop earlier than we would kind of hoped, but you can see that the yellow mustard was nice, and wild mustard was doing quite well. So we brought them in early to nip that in the bud, so to speak. And so we did that with high stock density grazing. Just a note that this picture was taken with my Ukrainian drone standing on the back rack of the quad, so works really well. I can fly it and not crash. So in 2015 and 16, a group of us went down and toured Neil Dennis's operation and Gabe Brown's as well, and we took away high stock density grazing from there. And so I started doing that. We're at 1 million pounds of live weight. And it's all good. It's fun. I enjoy it, but it is more work, more to it. So I thought I'd better see if it actually makes sense. So I did a trial and I split the field up and did high stock density grazing for 3/4 of it, and then the last about 10 acres of it or so, I just let them. I did day moves about 50,000 pounds of live weight per acre. So this is 1,000,000 pounds here in this picture, and this is what it looks like about 20 to 30 minutes later. And so a year later, that photo was taken in 2018, and this was 1 year later. We are in the General Mills regenerative ag program, and we had a little field day with them out at our place, and they're come to see what they're trying to get the grain guy to be more open to cattle, I guess. And so I hadn't looked at this, hadn't done any kind of looking to see if there was any difference in the two treatments. And I went out, and the only difference on these two was the density of the grazing. And so the darker, nicer looking, healthier crop is from the high stock density, and that is from the lower density. So the guys from Understanding Ag kind of got excited about that, and they come back out later on in the year, and we did some more testing, and this was what we found. The organic matter on the high density graze was 5.8, and the lower stocking density was 4.6. And these samples were taken, like they were taken 20 feet apart. It wasn't like we took it in a slough bottom and then way over on top of a hill or anything like that. We were just trying to be honest with ourselves, and you could see that line in the field. So it really worked out quite well. I was glad that I did that trial. So targeted winter feeding, my dad probably 25, 30 years ago now stopped feeding our cattle in a corral, and we started feeding them out on pasture. I guess he just got tired of hauling all that manure away. So we can still see the benefits of that to this day. And so now we spread that out over on our grain acres as well, anywhere that that works for winter feeding. So we'll target the poorer producing spots, and we will put a fairly aggressive bale grazing setup on that, and we're seeing some very good results from doing that. We make compost, like I said, so it's a homemade compost turner. We had a German friend who is extremely good at just about anything he does, and so basically he built that and we helped him, I'll be completely honest. And I know this doesn't have much to do with cover cropping, but it's all part of the system, and I don't think you can just take one thing and make it all shine, or it's all a big system. So so we did some trial, or my sister did some trials for me. She went and snuck a little bit and put it in with her tomatoes, and that was a tomato plant. They were chopping the roots out with an axe to get that out. And this is the soil that was underneath that tomato. Just beautiful stuff. So that even doing a garden trial is worth the effort. And this is our high-tech brewer that we use to extract and then brew teas or make extracts from the compost, and then we put that out on the field. This is what our seed looks like after it's been treated. And then this is kind of some of the root structures that we're seeing, and we see this continuously now. So that above growth would be about 6 inches as well, and these roots go down 6.5, 7 inches straight down. The plants can go through the hard pan, and it seems like if you put that biostimulant on for whatever reason, it's something in that rhizosphere changes, and it's able to do that. So with that, we're actually seeing that nice white soil that some of us have in places, and we're actually getting plants to live and work through that. Just some tips to get you started. Set a goal or goals. along with a budget, I think is pretty important before you start, and define what success looks like to you before you get started, because otherwise we'll fall in that unknown column there and in this cover crop survey. You know, define what you're going to use to measure as success, and have realistic expectations. If if it's a dry year, I wouldn't necessarily blame the cover crop that it didn't produce. If it's a good growing year and it doesn't produce, then obviously there's something wrong with something in that mix. And just be very cautious of the person selling you the answer to everything, and whether that's in seed or in a jug. So, some people call it failing, and I prefer to call it learning events or learning what doesn't work. So just plan to learn lots, adjust and adapt the plan and move forward. Try and see the positive in it, so that we can learn from it, obviously. Start at a comfortable size. So if that's to you, if that's just the garden, then that's just the garden. And if it's 100 acres, great. I started out at 130 acres, and now I do it on every acre in some way. Education is never free, whether you're getting that through university or through the School of Hard Knocks. There's always a cost to learning. Some challenges that we've seen along the way: we've had some wrong mixes, combinations of plants. Fall rye is awesome, but don't seed it with forage rape and think it's going to work out good, because the allelopathy effect is a thing. We're having a bit of an issue with worm seasons, getting them in and established later, but seems to be not as bad now. We've had intercrops that just didn't work out. I mean, we come in and graze them. It's not as, option B is usually not as profitable as option A, but you're able to salvage that, I guess. Broadcasting, unless it's going to rain for a week, I don't think you should do it. There's definitely some pros and cons to that. Improper stock density for weed control with grazing alone. If you're going to be using your livestock to control your weeds or to terminate the cover crop, you just need to be prepared that you'll need at least 500,000, like 500,000 pounds of live weight per acre, and multiple moves a day to do an efficient and effective job at that. So if you aren't able to do that, or that intimidates you, just be prepared to throw the cows out there and then graze it. Or maybe you should think about, or throw the cows out, graze it, and then come back and work it in. Or if that's not what you want to do, you can maybe cut it for feed and then capitalize on regrowth. You can have stuff get away on you if you try too hard to not do some form of weed control. And again, I'll just remember to keep it simple. And the more complex, the more moving parts we get, the more things to adjust and adapt, and more things that can go wrong. And eventually you get so complex that you become overwhelmed, and you just don't want to. You just end up doing absolutely nothing, because, oh my God, where do I start? So, cover cropping should be fun and very cost effective. So there's lots of learning resources out there. Podcasts, books, Twitter, YouTube. This is just a list of some of my favorite ones. I'll just, I guess, I'll take the moment to advertise here that I am on the board of directors with the SSCA, and we are rolling out a podcast here, hopefully very soon. And I'm going to start hosting it. So it's going to be called the Soilolutions Podcast. So you'll be able to search that out and give it a listen. So remember, if the neighbors aren't scratching their heads, you're just not trying hard enough. And thank you very much. You can feel free to follow me on Twitter. I don't go on Twitter a whole bunch anymore, but that's my handle on Twitter. And even just a good old-fashioned phone call. We do sell a little bit of seed now and grow some of our own our own varieties and species that work in our environment. So if I can help somebody move forward towards their goals, I'm more than happy to. But that being said, I'm probably the worst seed salesman in Western Canada, but I'm just not, if it fits, good. If it doesn't, I'm not going to sell you anything. So with that, guess we open up for questions.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Rob. That was such a great presentation, and I really appreciate the few slides at the end to help people who maybe haven't cover crop before to to have some measures and ideas of what success looks like. And I think that's true in pretty much all parts of life. It sure helps when you know what you're looking for. So there are a few questions here, so I'll just start. Are there any species you recommend that can be easily harvested so that seed doesn't have to be purchased every year?
Other than sweet clover, there isn't. I mean, and then of course your cereals, right? Like the other thing too is you don't necessarily, in order to have success, we don't necessarily need to be sourcing the latest millet from Japan or whatever. We can use oats and we can use forage peas, faba beans. Start with things that you have in the bin. And sweet clover is something I think that I know of quite a few guys that now combine their own, and even some millets. And if you through a network, you can find locally grown seed as well. I think that's kind of a tough one, but just start with what you have in the bin is usually a good place to start.
Okay, sounds great. So when snow is a poor option, how are you watering your cattle away from the yard in the winter?
Yeah, we've invested the money we've put in some dugouts with the dry well on the side of it, and then the solar watering system attached to that.
Okay, no, thank you. On your oat intercropping, did you see the vetch, etc., with the oats, and at what seed rate, depths, etc.? So looking for a few more details there.
Sure. Yeah, we seeded it all at the same time, all at the same depth, all down the same row. That's the beauty of that system there, or that style. The Italian ryegrass is between 3 to 4 pounds an acre. Purple top turnip at 1 pound per acre. And then hairy vetch, I know some people stray away from hairy vetch or concerned about it. And to me, it's like Frank's Red Hot Sauce. You just put that stuff on everything. But that we owe just to start off 1 pound or 2 pounds to the acre. And you can always adjust. It's way easier to say, boy, I wish I had more vetch than it is to say, well, the vetch overtook everything, and now I'm scrambling here. So that, yeah, I think that probably answers it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Have you incorporated these techniques with tree systems? So starting shelter belts or orchards?
Not yet. That's a very interesting question. I don't know if anyone else has looked outside yet today, but the winds are just howling here. And yesterday I was actually thinking about how do I build a shelter belt and that. So whoever sent that question, I'd be interested to talk to them if they have done that or if they have any ideas on that.
Okay, sure, we can pass that name along. Let's see. Can you explain a little more about the rye and forage issue that you talked about?
Yeah, sure. You bet. That seeded the fall rye in the spring of the year with the rest of the mix, and the plan was to have it set up like as a 2-year cover crop sort of a deal, and then what the allelopathy effect of the fall rye absolutely hammered the forage rate. And I've heard of another fellow in Alberta that is that tried to grow canola and fall rye together, same kind of a deal. It didn't work out for him either. So it's basically, I think it's just the allelopathy effect that really affects it.
Okay, perfect. And our last question, which I think is a big question, but I'll throw it out there anyway. How do you make your compost tea?
Yeah, it's not that hard at all. We make good compost, and I get diversity, so I have some worms and different things. Put that into a paint strainer bag. You buy like the 5-gallon ones from Home Hardware, and then you just need to aerate it. There's like that. There can be complex, but that's the simplest answer, I guess. And then you just aerate it for 24 hours, 48 hours if you're trying to get a tea out of it. And you even if it's just brown water or even if you think it's just brown water, I would highly recommend putting that onto your cereals. It's full of auto-inducers, biostimulants, so we're not actually introducing anything to the soil. We're just kind of connecting the communication gaps that are there, and it'll fire up the biology that may be laying dormant or doing other jobs that in the soil ecosystem there. Yeah, and then you just have to feed it after you get it going, and then you need a wide, again, just diversity in it, lots of different food sources, oat flour, sugar, molasses, kelp, fish, oat flour, alfalfa hay, just all kinds of different things in there to stimulate more biology.
All right. Well, thank you again, Rob. We really appreciate you taking the time as well today, and sharing what you know with us. And that
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So that brings us to the end of our cover cropping webinar this morning. Thank you again to Rob and Callum. And sorry, I'm just getting my stuff together here. We really appreciate you taking the time for being here. And thank you to everybody who's attended today. Just a little reminder, you'll receive an email in the next day or two that will provide a link to the recorded webinar, which you can access at any time. And when this webinar closes, there will be a short survey, and we really would appreciate you taking the time to answer the 2 or 3 questions there to help us improve what we do. And thank you again to our sponsors, ProCert, Grain Millers, Manitoba Harvest, and Roquette. And a little plug for Advancing Organics. We're taking it online this year, really hoping that in 2022 we'll be able to see you all in person again. But we hope we'll join you, or we hope you'll join us on the 25th and the 26th, and we'll be sending out some more information soon about that. And then if you missed some of our past webinars, the 2020 editions are on sale now for $10 each. So just hop over to our website and you can grab any of those that you might have missed last year. And that's it from us today. So have a good one. And I hope that wind dies down for you, Rob, where you are. And everyone have a great day.